And as part of that process, we learned a lot about COVID alongside all of you and alongside all of the national partners. So we're really happy to be part of today's conversation with our national partners to focus on, for what, the parlance calls you small states. And again, as I said earlier, we know you're not technically small states. You have large geographic coverage areas. It's more in terms of being the funded after that first large tranche. So we are glad you're here today because we need to talk about the deadline that is quickly approaching all of us. Let's go to the next slide, please. But we want to start off like we start off all webinars here at the partnership, with the promise of community action. Read it in your head along with me, but community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And during this COVID-19 pandemic, during the CARES investment in this country through community action, through CSBG, through your offices, this promise has resonated every day, incredibly strong in every corner of America. These dollars have been critically important, and we're going to talk today about where we kind of stand on that spending and how we can work together to ensure that we meet the needs across the country. Next slide, please. Really excited today again to be joined by our national partners, as we have throughout the pandemic. From day one, I think of one of our first national webinars in March of 2020, if not, or had to be March of 2020. We started those right off the bat, and then we were doing them every week. And then, oh my goodness, right? But here we are in May of 23, and we're still talking about it, right? But we're still here together, all of our national partners. Happy to have Sharice Johnson from the Office of Community Services, Allison Maloof from CapLaw, and Cheryl Williams from NASCASP. And the four of us today are going to walk through some key elements. And we also have Mary Beth Schneber-Remrev behind the scenes around a few others. And we're going to be tapping all the expertise across the national partners to make sure we can respond to your questions, provide you the most up-to-date information we have. And together, we're going to figure this out. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, CSBG CARES was meant to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. And I go a lot of places. I'm on a lot of planes lately. And the pandemic's over here, or the pandemic's in our rearview mirror. We know every week, hundreds of people are still passing away from COVID. We know people are still getting COVID. And we know when it comes to CARES, the economic impacts of COVID remain with us to this day. The increase in food prices in the grocery store, related to inflation, related to COVID. The increase in fuel prices, related to COVID. The economic challenges in communities, related still to COVID. And we're seeing debt loads of families. We're seeing rental and other programs, and we see many programs ending. The SNAP benefit that came out during COVID. We know there's Medicare or Medicaid issues here with the ending of the national health pandemic or health emergency. But the effects of COVID, right? How we respond to those effects, or how CARES dollars can be spent. And I say can in current timeline, right? So we're going to talk about that more here today. And again, we do have the chat window open. We hope that you will pose questions, comments, let us know what you're thinking. And if you have any questions or concerns, please, 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 we want to make sure we get to them. And we'll definitely have a chance for dialogue here today. So with that, we do know that the CARES funds expire at the end of September 30, 2022. That's for everything, right? There is no carryover. I've heard some confusing conversation out there. So we're here as the four national partners to say there is no confusion. Monies must be spent by September 30, right? There's all this expending and the cash flow issues. And Sharice, I'm sure will talk a little bit about this, as will Allison, but there is no carryover of these dollars. They must be spent. We know family, agency, and community needs continue to persist in this country. And again, as Sharice has said oftentimes, as has Dr. Howard from OCS, this is truly a chance for us to demonstrate our value. And I wish I could hold up a copy of the CARES report the partnership did at the end of our TNTA dollars for CARES. But what we did in that moment was try to highlight all the great work. And we acknowledge that it couldn't capture everything because you're still doing that great work here today. but I've talked enough. Let's get to the meat of the matter. And Sharice, you're going to share with us today kind of where we sit, both the good news, because there is good news to share, as well as kind of what some of our challenges are and where we want to focus some of our attention. So Sharice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you, National Partners, for asking the Office of Community Services to join this meaningful and important conversation. But first, I would like to say is that we see community action agencies making a difference. And I see in the chat, the person put in Happy Community Action Month, and I just want to say I concur with that. But most importantly, we know that across the country over the last few years, there's been impeccable work in regards to responding to the needs of families, individuals, families, and communities as a result of the pandemic. And so it would, we have to say thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your service. We're almost across the finish line in regards to how we've used these supplemental funds to support families at a difficult time, to support individuals and communities. So I would say we've done a great job, and I'm sure you know that we see you and we see what you've tried to do over the last couple of years just to really embrace your communities, make sure needs were met. If we go to the next slide, we'll really start talking about 2020 funds. Of all of the funding that we received in 2020, just as a reminder, across the country, it should be applauded. We spent 98.3% of the funding. So we are doing really well. And I want to say this, just to preface it, is that hopefully by the time we close out, we will start to see that we're closer to that 100% mark, or 99.7%. And if you round that up, that's 100%. I mean, I'm just saying we are doing an impeccable job, and I want you all to know that we're almost there. The next slide. In regards to the supplemental funding for the, for the 12 small states, we want to just let you know that in regards to the states, 76.7% of the funding has been drawn down. Got a little ways to go with the 23.26%, but the blue represents what has actually been drawn down, and the gold represents what's remaining. And with the tribes, we're at 66.14%, 33.8% is remaining. So you can just start to see the picture, and that's why the partners wanted us to have this important conversation, just to nudge a little bit more, remind a little bit more that we still have a little ways to go. We know that communities still have needs as they recover from the pandemic, and so we have some great opportunities to continue to address the needs that we see at a local level. Next slide. Then you see by states. So if you're on this call, based on our last drawdown reports, you can see states are at different places. Some of us have 88.6% that we've dispersed. Some have less than that amount. But look at your numbers. This is based on what we see from the payment management system. As drawdown, there's so many more opportunities and a lot of money left on the table in regard to opportunities to serve families. So we want you to really think about some of the future conversations, the future messages in this meeting, this webinar regarding opportunity to spend money in different ways, really going back, looking at the community level needs assessment to see if there's something that really, really needs to be addressed. And you can use the CSBG CARES Supplemental funding to do that. But 12 small states, we still have some work to do. And if you have questions about any of the information here, you can always send it to me directly, or you can send it back to the partnership regarding the percentages. But based on what we see and based on what's in the payment management system as of May the 16th, I believe, this is what your spending looks like. This is how much you've drawn down. So we clearly have work to do. Moving in the right direction, we are most definitely moving in the right direction. And you see where we've gone from 18 million and now we're down to 13 million. But $13 million is a lot of money to have on the table, although it's only 29% of the actual amount that was available. We want to spend every dime we have to address the needs in the community. We're on a great trajectory. We say thank you for that, but we have a little ways to go. And the next slide really sums up in regards to our tribes. We see that tribes have quite a bit of ways to go as they have 15% of their funding remaining. We've talked a lot about those community partnerships with tribes and tribal communities. So it may be even opportunities to reach out to your tribes and community action agencies to work together to see how they can strategize on ways to meet the needs of tribal community members and tribes as they try to spend now their funding as well. So our overall message from the Office of Community Services is that these are the figures based on the payment management system. I call it the bank account. You've drawn down quite a bit of money. There's still some more opportunities to continue to pull down money and draw down money to meet the needs. We need for this money to be obligated on the September 30th date. That means you've obligated these resources. And then of course, you work with your states to liquidate the fundings through your final reports. Please take this opportunity to really think about how much money you have left, going back to your finance offices or your chief of financial operations and talk about ways in which you can start to spend those resources. And let's see that number continue to go down in regards to how much money is available across the network for CSBG supplemental funding as a result of CARES. So thank you for this time. I'm available for questions and excuse me. And I'm going to turn it back over to Denise, but I do want you to look at the OCS guidance that has been provided. This is on our website. This will probably provide even more guidance on how the money has been used, how mortgage assistance kind of evolved out of this work and trying to help families maintain their homes, and also recommendations on how to spend the funding. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it back to Denise.
All right, Sharice, that was a ton of data. Maybe we can go back to the little circles. Let's go back the little pie charts for each state so everyone can kind of take a look, because I know somebody in the chat said the numbers were pretty small for them. Just so in case you have a chance to expand, close your chat or move the gallery of pictures over a little bit, take a look, right, where your state sits. Think about, is this surprising to you? Is this what you assume? Because I think we have a blend of, I know we have some state associations, we have state offices, we might have some local agencies on as well. I haven't taken that close of a look at the list, my apologies. And let's go to the next slide again, one more time, just so we can show folks where folks are remaining. As Sharice said, I would echo her comment. You've done fantastic work. 98% is just rocking it. 13 million is kind of a big number. And we have enough of a runway here maybe to really land this plane in a solid way. I see Clint saying, are we doing well enough to do a happy dance?
A half of a happy dance. So I can just do like this, but the next time we're going to all stand up and dance when we get to that 99%. Thank you, Clint.
South Dakota does get one. So congratulations, South Dakota. Great. And let's go to the one more slide one more time. And these were tribes. Again, you can see there's 800,000 or so. And let's go one more, see if there was another one. I'm sorry. Okay. And that was the guidance. Good. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the role that each of us has to play. And then we're going to dive into some of the questions. So please, please, please put your questions into the chat that you might have here today. And I know some of you submitted questions as you registered, and we're going to go through some of those. So local agencies, we know, are on the front lines. They're meeting families face to face. What we saw in some of the questions that were submitted, I think might be good for state offices. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk today about the flexibilities we see in CSBG CARES. Some of the messaging to local agencies, however, it's what we got in some of the registration feedback is that clarity of flexibility may not be as strong as we necessarily say here from the national office. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But local state associations have been critical, and I saw Andrea and Clint and others in the list as well. State associations, you all have been fantastic to keep communication lines open, to kind of be the liaison oftentimes between local agencies and state offices, and then liaisoning with the national partners has also been incredibly helpful. State offices, we know this is a big burden for you to bear. Many of you are working with very small offices as well, and that can be a real challenge. On top of all of the regular CSBG and data and state annual reports and all the things that are layered on top of you, which we know is a challenge. I hope that you've seen that the national partners here, whether it's NASCASP, the partnership, or CAPLAW, have really been helpful to you as TA providers, as non-federal ears. But the federal partner at OCS is also critically important, right? Key questions can and should be elevated to OCS when need be. They're the ones who are able to provide some direct guidance. And again, we're always thankful to have cap law in our back pocket to have the legal perspective in addition to that as well. Okay. The questions that came through here today or prior as folks registered. Excuse me. There was some comment about levels of flexibility. Sharice, maybe you could talk about, I mean, we've talked about right from day one, the effects of the pandemic are significant. They're long lasting. I said that in my opening remarks. We're still feeling the impacts of the pandemic today, whether that's on elevated food prices, housing prices, inflation, transportation. Could you talk about how OCS sees the effects of the pandemic connected to today's economy and how CARES can be spent?
Denise, we have this conversation at least quarterly because we have to report up to our leadership regarding how these CARES funds are being spent. And the main thing that we always say is that CSBG funding is flexible when you can align it with the goal of CSBG. And so, for example, even the mortgage assistance IM that came out, that was a way of saying, what's another way, a flexible way, and that's why that IM was put out on how CSBG funds from CARES could be used to support families in maintaining their homes. We know that families have been displaced, and we hear from the field. There have been some situations in which family members have received assistance with transportation, assistance with locating jobs. So CSBG funding, anything that you can take that thread and it leads to improving the outcomes for families or responding to the impact of CARES, the funding really can be spent. Now, can we do capital building? We cannot build buildings, but we can do minor repairs. If something happened and it's preventing a family from being able to stay in their homes or meet their basic needs, can we help with utility and crisis intervention? Absolutely. It's flexible funding, but it helps to move individuals and families out of the situation that they're in. We hear stories with food pantries that during the pandemic, that food pantries were all of their resources were exhausted. But what's wrong with partnering with a food pantry to say we really need to continue to have food available for families as they recover? So CSBG is very flexible, but we should always go back to the goals of CSBG to determine if we're really addressing the needs in the community. And then the final thing I say, and this is a soapbox of mine, and you all will probably hear it. What is your community needs assessment telling you are the needs at the local level? I'm hoping that many of the participants on this call are actually thinking about their community needs assessment, how their community has changed, how you have more people that you're serving up to the 200% of the federal poverty level and what their needs may be, how people who've never accessed services before may walk through a door and access services because something has changed in their life or something has changed regarding employment. But if you can link it back to how it's helping that person move beyond that condition as a result of the pandemic, then I would say that's a nice strategy or a nice formula to think about when you're thinking about how you will use CSBG, and that CSBG is flexible. And even in the toolkit that you're going to discuss a little bit later, it talks about all of these different ways we can think out of the box, how we can really use the data that we have at the community level and the state level to identify if there's some unmet needs, something that has not been addressed. And if you have questions about it, you can vet it with your national partners, but you also can reach out to your program specialist or your state or state association to ask questions regarding. Sharice talked about that flexibility piece. Does this sound like flexibility to you? This is what we're thinking about: transportation services, rural development support. Whatever the challenge is, you always ask your question: how does it lead to moving people beyond the conditions of poverty?
I tracked you on that, Sharice, right? Your needs assessment says hunger is a need, or access to safe or healthy and affordable food is a need in your needs assessment. The current economy has impacted inflation that has jacked prices up. Families are still in need. That inflation is related to the effects of the pandemic. CSBG CARES can be used to ensure families have access to healthy and affordable food, free food boxes, working with your food pantries. We've done webinars on gift cards, all that kind of stuff. So, and I know folks who submitted that in your registration for today, right? You're not alone. Those questions have been asked repeatedly, even by the so-called large states, even though Rhode Island, even though they're small geographically. Back before, when they had dollars, these same conversations were happening. But you're hearing OCS say that. And Caplaw, Allison, I'm going to turn to you to kind of back that up a little bit. Can you talk a little bit too about how today's economic connections to the pandemic tie to CSBG CARES?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note that in the legislation for CARES, it talked about, preventing, preparing, and responding to the impact of COVID, the coronavirus. And there's been a tremendous amount of impact on our communities that we are still trying to manage and cope and deal with. And, I think one that we've talked about a lot over these last several years is mental health. A lot of kids and children missed a lot of really critical education opportunities and socialization that, we keep seeing articles about the impacts. And I just saw an article the other day talking about even with LIHEAP out there and the money that LIHEAP had, it's less funding than it was during CARES. And now we've got a bunch of people who aren't able to pay their energy bills. And, due to inflation, due to all kinds of issues. And even though there are, at one point our job market seemed really tight, for our population, we have to think about, are our people able to slot into where there are jobs available, and are we able to get them equipped and ready to get into those positions? And that's not an overnight proposition. That takes time to do. And so we're still trying to help in that way. So there's just a lot out there. And I think when you're thinking about COVID at this point, I think there still is prevention work that can be done. Maybe your office, maybe you're continually checking the levels in your area. Maybe you're having an increase in cases and you need to get some supplies to help make sure your staff and your families or so forth and so on are being protected. So I think there's still that piece of it, but I think a lot of the focus right now is how are we responding to everything that we've been through at this point, and how are we helping our families, not just our staff, because there's a lot of impact there as well, our staff and our families that we're supporting, our individuals, continue to move in the right direction. And I'll just go back to the staff piece. We're still also in a workforce depletion period with respect to, all of our organizations have limits on what we can pay our staff. So we've got to think creatively about how we can support them and retain them and recruit to fill positions. And so there are options there that could come into play with respect to those CARES dollars and that kind of work. And I think the guide that your team put out, Denise, the LANA's list that was heavily promoted and put out there and really put to use, really does give a robust list of options that are, many of which are still applicable, for better or worse, they're still applicable at this time.
I was just thinking a year ago when we were talking in spring about the upcoming summer and the impact of learning loss on children from the pandemic. And as children begin to exit school and enter their summer, right, we are back in a time where you, as small quote unquote states, have resources perhaps that can plug in some of those gaps and encourage and pay for children's access to summer camps and things like that can help encourage ongoing learning and fill some of those gaps that were created directly by the pandemic and being out of school or having disrupted school or online school. Right. So there are a lot of options there. Yeah, who needs Angie's list when you have Lana's list? That's what I like to say. And I will say that some folks, who registered did say that, some of their states were fantastic in the flexibility. So if there are states who are hesitant, Cheryl, thoughts on, I know NASCASP has been incredibly helpful in convening states and having those conversations. Thoughts that you'd want to add to that?
Well, I think, to piggyback on, what's already been said, I can't emphasize this enough in that, we, as we see the need sort of evolve, not go away, but evolve from crisis into, we left from making sure that everybody had PPEs and all those types of things and making sure that people got vaccinated. And now we're still, as was mentioned earlier, dealing with the effects of inflation and all those things. What's really critical at the state level is making sure that as those needs evolve, we are also from an administrative perspective, demonstrating that flexibility. Are we partnering, making sure that we're partnering with other state offices to ensure that these services can be streamlined in the best possible way for states to make it easier for associations and local agencies to spend these dollars down? Are we looking for ways that these programs can, that the dollars rather can be dispersed more efficiently from an administrative standpoint? How are we making linkages across our state networks so that what we're really doing is addressing the needs as they continue to evolve and staying, as close as we can to the ground on that level and have that kind of that ability to pivot and provide that support to our state networks as the needs continue. That's, I think, one of the biggest pieces that will be helpful at the state level. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we're providing from the NASCAP's perspective, providing that support to state offices so that they can help make those decisions too. Are there places where state offices need some guidance on how to actually administer these programs or these dollars so that they're the most effective ways of getting, meeting those needs? That's definitely a place where we can provide support to states, and hopefully then states can transfer that support to associations and local agencies.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. And we just so appreciate everything that NASCAS has done during this time. It's just keeping up with all of the things has just been fantastic. We appreciate you and your entire team. Sharice, a question had come through the chat, and I think we talked about this over the last couple of years. What's the delay window between PMS reporting and what's actually being spent down in the field? We know what PMS shows is not going to be exact, but do you have any sense of what the trends or averages would look like in terms of that differential?
Denise, and to all others on the call, it's my understanding that one thing is that different states draw down money at different times. So if they only do it once a quarter, it's only as good as the last drawdown. So that's one thing to consider. The other piece is that it's pretty much real time based on the last drawdown. And so if like for us, if we're reporting information from May 16th, when we last went into the system, that means it's as current as May 16th. There's typically not a delay unless there's some other factor or problem going on that impacts that. But it's based on whatever the state's plans are in regards to how they draw down funding. And also it's also related to when we pull our data. And we normally, before a meeting like this, that's why we kind of went in the middle of the month, because therefore we give the people time to draw down, because they're doing drawdowns in the first of the month, for it to populate by the middle of the month. And the data that you have is just that current in regards to what has been drawn down. So it's almost real time based on when the last drawdown was from that state.
Yeah, so even your state office would probably have the best information, right?
Yes,
If there's been whether they're because the agencies are spending and then asking for reimbursement, and they know what that, are you paying them right away and waiting 2 months to draw down? So you're right, the states probably have a better handle. I do just want to shout out that, Karen Quackenbush, I'm seeing some love in the chat for you there. Just wanted to shout that out. We'll echo that. Clint, your comment here about the end of Section 42, right? The public health crisis and all that sort of thing. That's my recollection what the section 42 is. I should know that. I know, Allison, you've done a lot of framing about the end of the public health crisis and some of the impacts on local agencies. Maybe you could talk about a bit about that and tie that to CARES money.
Yeah, so I think the big impact of the end of the public health emergency really, had to do with some of the administrative flexibilities that came out of that executive order in that time. And so I think for CSBG, it's not really quite as impactful from the perspective of, as Cherie said, we've maintained a level of flexibility with respect to use of those dollars. I think where flexibility was provided early on, I'm sure if needed, there is that continues through. I could see with respect to needs assessments and updating needs assessments and that sort of area of administrative work that may need to be done to be as relevant and as current as possible in the work that you're doing around COVID and coronavirus. And my understanding is that flexibility is still there. And, that's just working with your state on that piece of it. I think, there were some flexibilities that aren't specifically tied to CSBG. They were more around sort of state flexibilities that really applied to the boards and governance and making decisions and your bylaws and filling board seats and all that sort of thing. And a lot of those flexibilities have gone away. So that is, kind of going back to operations as normal. I understand that, we've not really fully gone back to normal. And I know everyone's so sick of the new normal term, but that's kind of where we live these days. Is every day it's sort of evolving into something different, not quite so dramatically as it had been during the pandemic, but things are constantly evolving. So, I do think organizations have had to think about that, but I also think some of those flexibilities that were given at the state level were ending even prior to the overall health emergency that was ending at the time. So, I hope people aren't sort of equating the ending of the public health emergency with, it's 100% back to normal with respect to, some of these flexibilities that we have with respect to spending these CARES dollars. I mean, we've always needed to connect those CARES dollars to the need that was out there and to that general directive that we are preparing, responding to, preventing COVID and the use of those dollars, and then also furthering the goals of the federal CSBG Act and doing that. So all that's tied in together, and that really hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think about the end of the emergency SNAP benefit, for instance, that's putting definite pressure on food banks, food pantries, and CAP agencies, right?
Well, and I think to that point, Denise, that really puts, the work that CAAs do even, in the forefront, right? Because that stuff has ended from a programmatic perspective, that means there's a gap there. And that's what we do. We go in and we fill in gaps and we try to make it so that people get what they need. So, I think the ending of the public health emergency from a programmatic perspective, as you're noting, is critical in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, as Karen put in the chat, right, the sunsetting of the emergency rental assistance is even sometimes you think about rental payments and evictions, and the IM focused on, or IM DCL on mortgage assistance, right, becomes more and more critical every day. And there are opportunities there that if you have CARES dollars, you can step in, given some of those other dollars have ended. Clint mentioned the affordable or the connectivity program, right? Internet access and things like that will start in June. There are different various programs that, that are still coming. Kyle asked a good question here, and this came up certainly over the last 3 years as well. We talk a lot about community level support, and early days of COVID, right? The drive-through food pantry, Cherie, hopefully we collected all our data, right? On all of those boxes that were going into trunks, but we all remember the long lines, the huge pallets. But community level change and community level investments, Kyle asks a little bit about how do we handle qualifications and documentation. I don't know, Cherise, if you'd like to respond to that, or Allison?
Well, a part of the annual reporting process for CSBG is there is a component to report out data on the CARES funding. And so I'm believing that you should be able to report out on how you responded in different ways to the needs based on your state plan and what was reported up to your state. So we hope to see evidence there of the activities and how funding was used specifically to CSBG CARES Supplemental in those annual reports that you're submitting. So that is the first, and I hope I'm answering that question, Denise, but that is really the primary mechanism that we use in order to determine how the CARES fund was spent and how the money was allocated to address community level needs in collaboration with our states, because they are the support that's given to the community action agencies as they develop their plans, and also even looking at the data that's being submitted as a result of the annual report.
Yeah. Allison, maybe you could go to talk a little bit about how, because you provided some guidance in terms of gift cards and things like that too. When you have these big pop-up events, right? How do you ensure everyone coming through the drive-through or coming to the community-wide event, right, is in the 200%? I think we can make a lot of assumptions in many cases. Thoughts on how you might document or track some of that?
Yeah, and I'll just put a plug in that we did a pandemic supplement to our CSBG eligibility guide, and maybe if John hasn't done so, oh, he did it. Oh no, he put that in. Maybe John, John put in the article or the resource that we have, an online resource around the ending of the public health emergency, and I'm sure he'll throw in there. He just did the income eligibility guide in there. And I think in general, I think ways to think about it, and we would get questions like this even prior to the pandemic. And as I think everybody on this call likely knows, there really is no language in the federal CSBG Act other than meeting that threshold limit, which was potentially increased by a state during the pandemic, with respect to how do you determine eligibility, and that can be left up to the CAA with oversight by the state, or that could be a collaboration between the state and the CAA in coming up with what that process and those procedures will look like. And with respect to sort of generalized assistance that could be provided, I think you have to think about, are we going into an area that census data could show that, more than a majority of the people in this area are ones that would be eligible for our services. That could be a way in which you could verify that most of the people coming into that event or the community that you're targeting is a community that would meet that eligibility requirement. I also think part of it is just communicating out about what is available. So I think if you are concerned that maybe you're in an area or you're worried about documenting eligibility, I think one option would be to have that be a communication event that then gives information about how people go and go to the community action agency or go to a location to get further assistance, which could be involving verification of eligibility and the way in which the community action agency does that. So I think there are ways in which that could happen.
Allison, I wanted to ask you a question, just to kind of build off what you're saying. Also, there should be internal policies and procedures for the agency if they're going to have these type of events that talks about, does the recipient have to sign some type of document? To make sure, what I mean? So there are different ways in order to be, I wasn't clear, Denise, I apologize on that, what the question was, but the agency needs to have procedures and policies on how they manage those type of events. That's very important, and that they implement consistent with their policy or procedure.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to sort of just, whether it's comes from the state or it's at the CAA level, that there's, you know, an understanding of how a community action agency is going to address eligibility and the different circumstances within which they are going to provide services. And again, if you're concerned about eligibility, use the event as a communication event and make sure that you're directing people in ways in which they can meet whatever requirements you have with respect to eligibility and the way in which you're accounting for it in your policies and so forth. Like that.
And seeing Heather's question in the chat, yeah, I would refer you to the tool that Jonathan put into the chat and follow up probably directly with CapLaw on that, because some of the hints that she gave hopefully address your question as well. And Clint, you're asking whether or not that could be a similar process to what HUD does in terms of documenting low and moderate income for CDBG.
Yeah, I'm not, Clint, can you maybe unmute yourself and talk a little bit? I'm not completely up to date on how HUD, what that process is for CDBG.
Sure, it sounds like there was some kind of exercise you can do. I'm not an expert at it either, but I've had some interaction with it before, where people will say you're automatically eligible based on census data in a certain census tract, based on, and you can establish that you're serving a low, moderate income area. And so they waive some of the individual eligibility determination. And so when I heard you say something about using census data, that's kind of what came to my mind. I don't know if that helps at all with that context.
Oh no, that is helpful. Yes, and I do think that that's data that is used to support in certain circumstances when you're providing. I think another way that we talk about in our guide, which is, you know, if you know that the population, so like if it's Head Start parents, generally you know that they're going to be eligible. If it's individuals who are living in an affordable housing, like if you're going to that area and you're providing services or gift cards in that area within that framework, then you can feel fairly confident that those individuals who are living in that circumstance are going to be eligible for those services. So I think that there are ways in which you can target the population that you're trying to serve. Now, I think you're also trying to make sure, and this is a directive of CSBG, that you are making sure you're reaching everyone, and that requires a level of communication out into areas that maybe you're trying to make sure based on census data or other data that there are populations or groups of individuals in those areas that need assistance. And so if that's part of the area that you're supposed to serve and you're trying to make sure you're serving it, then I think you can use that data to sort of help target those efforts in those areas.
Great, thank you. All right, so you've heard of Lana's list. We're going to, I'm going to turn here to Mary Beth. We're going to walk you through this document. I know it's been put into the chat as well. And then we're also going to share with you certainly the link to the report we did last August that, again, hopefully if there are ideas or other things that are helpful that you might be able to find in there. But Mary Beth, you want to walk us through Lana's list?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Community Action Month. I can't believe May is almost over. Oh my goodness. But okay, so I want to talk about 10 ways that we have seen community action agencies use their CSBG CARES funds. One of the things that we saw in your questions was, what are some allowable costs, right? Like, what am I allowed to do with my CSBG? And you heard Cherise, you heard Allison, you heard Denise, you heard Cheryl, you heard everyone talk about the flexibility of CSBG. So it's not as simple as, here's a list of every possible thing you could do with CSBG, because that list would be endless, I think. So these are some examples of things we have found to be allowable, but these are not the only things that are allowable with your CSBG funds either, okay? That's the caveat I want to give you. And Lana's list has way more than 10 ideas. Here's just 10 big ones that we wanted to highlight for you. So we have talked about this already. Customers, the people we serve, continue to have significant needs that are tied to the pandemic. So many things just cost more: our food, our gas, school supplies, baby formula, diapers. And all of those things are higher from COVID impacts that we are still feeling. And so you can support your customers with direct assistance to purchase food, to give gift cards to the local grocery store, to support with transportation, gas cards, car repairs might be necessary, school supplies, all direct customer assistance that you can give to customers in your agency. I'm going to go through these quick, but guys, if you have questions as I'm going, or you have a great approach that you've done, put that in the chat because we'd love to see it. The other thing that we've talked about is, children continue to have significant needs that stem from COVID. I don't think we've seen all of the impacts quite yet on our children. We're feeling the impacts of learning loss. Gosh, guys, the change in model in the way that schools approach learning from COVID, like LTI is here to stay, or NTI, excuse me, is here to stay. So, we have to be thinking about ways that we can support our kids to be successful in this new world, especially to, I think it was Allison who mentioned mental health. Our children's mental health is essential. And so there are lots of strategies that you can do to support children to address these needs. Tutoring, summer's coming up, programs to stem the tide of learning loss. Maybe you're supplementing strategies to increase learning by bringing in staff into a community center, doing a summer reading program at a local community center, at a public housing complex. All ways that you could use your CSBG CARES dollars and address the needs related that kiddos are having stemming from COVID. You might also consider bringing in a counselor to a community center or Head Start or an after-school activity to give kids a safe place to talk. That's another great way to use your dollars. Also, I skipped right over the middle one, but y'all probably noticed childcare. Childcare, my goodness, those costs have skyrocketed. Another great way that you can use your funds is to help parents cover those increased costs for childcare. And panel, if I'm going too fast or you have thoughts to add, please chime in. Health, I think that this one is fairly obvious. We know so many folks put off doctor's visits. Getting into the doctors is difficult post-COVID too. I know, like, I called my dentist and can't get in for cleaning for 6 months, and that's just the normal, right? Like, that is just normal in my area. And so a lot of people have delayed their engagement with the healthcare system, or have been delayed in that engagement with the healthcare system. And so folks might have more severe health concerns. They might need additional supports to get healthy, and then also reform that habit of going back to the doctor, right? So help people get connected to their doctors, maybe have a wellness day at your agency, bring in providers, connect families to professionals, support vaccination efforts. That's another area that we've seen, not just COVID vaccines, but overall, vaccination, timely vaccination has gone down, right? Those age recommended vaccinations, we are not up to date on our vaccinations. And that is a huge health risk for our kids and for adults. And so you can support those efforts as well. We've seen a lot of agencies who do incentives. They give gift cards when, parents get their required vaccination schedule, when kiddos get their required vaccination schedule. So you could do that even in partnership with your Head Start classrooms, right? Send out a notification to those Head Start parents. As I said, support wellness visits, dental, vision, and then again, mental health. If you can help resource and connect individuals and families to mental health services, that is allowable and can be a tremendous support for our families. We talked about housing already as well. We know that some folks have major arrears from eviction and shut-off moratoriums. You can use your CSBG CARES to help cover those, because for some families, it is going to be impossible to dig out of those arrearages. And so think about how you could use your dollars that way. Also, just, I don't know if y'all have noticed, the cost of housing has just skyrocketed, period. There's a housing shortage. And so support rental payments, eviction prevention, maybe help people obtain housing who lost it during COVID. Also saw that a lot of places. And so your funding can be used in a variety of ways. And do go check out that guidance from OCS about mortgage assistance and its allowability. That is a huge win for the program, and we are so grateful to OCS for issuing that guidance. Thank you. So another thing that we know is that the needs are rapidly changing post-COVID. I think Cheryl used the word evolving, and things are just continue to evolve. And it's essential that we stay abreast of what the needs are, and informed and centered in what our customers need. So one of the ways that we can use our CARES dollars is to leverage the expertise of the people that we serve to give us not just insight into how, what needs are, but to invite people to co-create strategies with us that can address those very real community and family needs that people are experiencing. I see it as really putting our money where our mouth is. We say, that we center in customer voice. What do we do with experts? When you bring in a consultant to advise you on how to form a program, you pay them. We should absolutely, when we are engaging with our customers and asking them to give their time and their expertise, we should be compensating them for that fairly and significantly, just like you would a consultant. Some other really awesome practices that we've seen involve working with customers as trusted messengers to promote activities. So if you're perhaps, we've seen an agency who had a vaccination campaign that utilized customers that lived in the community to go door to door, or to talk to people in their church, or talk to people in their community center to promote safe COVID practices and vaccination. We also have seen where agencies have hired customers to support like a door-to-door campaign to deeply understand emerging needs in a particular community, and help inform kind of next steps and best practices or strategies that the agency is going to deploy to address that community's needs. Also, gosh, guys, customer leadership development, COVID has really taught us the importance of folks having a voice in our systems, right? Having a seat at the table. So you can help customers to grow their capacity to engage in leadership. Now, there is an asterisk on this slide, and it says, ensure operational due diligence, which is like words from lawyers. So Allison, I wonder if there's anything you want to add about some of this element of paying customers.
Yeah, happy to. I know we're kind of getting close to time. So all I would say is that when you are issuing payments, you just want to make sure that you're clear on what's going to be required from an IRS perspective with respect to those payments, and potentially from any sort of wage and hour laws that could apply. And so generally the rule of thumb is whenever you're paying somebody, I would think in this circumstance, but you'd want to look at your facts that this would be sort of an independent contractor relationship or setup. And so you're going to have to think about how you would manage those payments. If you're paying over $600, and you're going to have to do 1099s and all that kind of good stuff with respect to that. And so we can't really give tax advice to people, but that that could impact people's taxes depending on how much it is. So you just want to make sure that they're getting the needs, getting all those kinds of scenarios addressed.
I think that's the only time you're going to hear the words 1099 and good stuff in the same sentence. But sorry, Cherise, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to kind of build on something that we said earlier. You really need to understand what you're getting into when you make these type of strategic decisions and implement these activities. It needs to be documented well how you will carry it out, because you want all staff to have the information they need to support these type of activities. And if you've not documented how you will carry this out, then you don't have anything in my mind to refer back to should you be, ask questions on, well, how did you manage this piece of this? Or how did you do the 1099? Or how did you inform people? Kind of thinking through what you're trying to achieve and making sure pieces are in place to kind of guide that strategy and how you implement that strategy. Documentation.
Document. Thank you. Okay, so I know we've just got a few minutes left. Just want to flag. You can use your funds to support your own internal capacity. We know you have tremendous turnover rates, burnout rates. Use CSBG to support your staff, counseling, training, employee leadership, recruitment, all of that good stuff, all allowable uses of your funds. You can use your funds to support small businesses that have been majorly impacted by COVID-19. We've seen great strategies with agencies resourcing childcare facilities in their communities. A lot of childcare facilities are small businesses and are a critical infrastructure piece in a local community. So help facilities purchase high quality materials, curriculum, resource them with professional staff like counselors, coaches, things like that. Also coaching and counseling for low-income entrepreneurs, also great strategies we've seen. Job training, we've seen a shift in the jobs, the types of jobs. I think, we as a network are deeply familiar with job training. The need for job training has not gone away. And so you can absolutely use your funds that way. There's more ensure operational due diligence. You have heard Allison's spiel and pitch on operational due diligence. And that really goes for all of this. Make sure you're doing your due diligence. We heard Sharice, document, right? Pop-up events is the last way, a great way. It's a great way to promote your agency as a resource, as Allison shared earlier. It also increases the visibility of the needs of the people in our community. And that's part of what we're here to do is to lift that up and advocate for systemic changes to help our families. So have a back to school event, have a new moms event, have an end of summer event. There's lots of things that you can do in this space. And so those are 10 ways that we've seen agencies utilize their funds. If that's not enough inspiration for you, be sure that you check out this amazing report that we put together that shows how community action has responded to the COVID-19 crisis throughout the pandemic. We have a digital version that you can check out. We have stories from every state in the country, over 130 examples of amazing community action work. So I know I went through that fast. Were there any questions that came through in the chat while I was blabbering?
I didn't see any questions. No, you covered, I think, the real highlights. And I know there's links in the chat for people to access that directly. And we will be sending out the slides. So people asking for that as well.
And Denise,
Well-
I have one piece that I don't think we talked about as much, is that there are issues around housing insecurity. And
Yeah.
so people who are in shelters, sometimes that's an untapped outreach that the CAAs could do. Another piece is around people who have experienced, we've heard that there's been some increase in issues around mental health as it relates to family violence or domestic violence. So there may be opportunities to reach out to your shelters as a way to see if what's going on with those individuals that you may see showing up, and can the funding be used to support that? And then the only other areas that when we think about mental health, I just want to say that it seems like it's across the board from the mental health of adults as well as our youth. And so just figuring out the partnerships with your local mental health systems on how you can work together to address issues if just through communication. And then finally, disaster. Some people have been trying to recover from the pandemic and been exposed to disasters. So it's, are there conversations, because I can imagine it's hard to tell which one is going on. But people are still recovering from some of these disasters that have hit different parts of the country. And how can you partner to make sure that people are being made whole and that their needs are being addressed as they try to recover from two different tragic situations?
One other thing that I know, well, folks with long COVID, just want to put that out there too. That has been we knew that from early on that people were suffering the effects of long COVID, but I think we're really seeing a proportion of our country, of our neighbors who are, and perhaps folks even on today's call who might be suffering the effects of. So keeping that in mind as well, there are new impacts that seem to come out every day. So next slide, please. We do have a graphic that was designed to try to tell the story of community we have this. Okay, of the pandemic and community actions response. I hope you see yourselves in this report, even though you're still spending. I hope that you find yourselves here, and we do have this available up on our website. You're able to send it to your own printers and things like that as well. But we do have our contact information here. Please reach out to us. We have Verna Best on here as well from OCS, as well as Sharice. The national partners are here to help you, here to answer questions. If you need some one-on-one, holler. We're here for you. So I'll ask Cheryl, Allison, Sharice, anything else before we close out here today?
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We're here if you need us, but keep doing what you're doing. You all are amazing. Just a shout out of love and happy Community Action Month. We'll see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.